others will be picked on to help in the future. So I think we're just gonna introduce general information about what was going on here at Meigs County about the time.
Yeah, and then she's the murder person. First of all, I going back to all those pieces, the health department has given us information at times. June Triplett has given us information. It's one of those things where this stuff is interesting to a lot of people. When you get history down to a local level, here's what's happening at the national level, then that's okay, you know, it's kind of interesting, but then when you bring it down, well, here's what was happening. I can tell you about Al Capone and the St. Valentine's Day Massacre is not as interesting as the murder she's talking about. You can come in. There's seats around here, you can come around. It's a different thing when she's saying, okay, they got shot and killed in front of the Meigs Inn, okay? Or out in whatever Possum Hollow we have. That's what makes it really interesting. This and so that's what we're going to go for. Now, my eyes are, I just had cataract surgery. I can see you with these off. If I put them on, I can't see you, but I can see the paper that I'm on. Just so you know, that's how it works. So, in this case, so here's my part, because I've already done a van tour of this, and without the murders. But then somebody came up with a brilliant idea. What if we put these two things together? And so my part is going to be just, here's what was happening nationally. This is all about her courtroom. You want to have evidence. In history, you want to have evidence. This isn't what our grandmothers told us. This is what we're finding in the records. This is what we found in the newspapers. It's that kind of a thing, and it is pretty good. So having told you that, let me tell you that, that we're talking about the years 1920 to 1933. That's when prohibition officially was an issue in the United States. But it was an issue before that. The tour that I did last month, maybe, the tour that I was doing last month, ended up, they found an article that was about prohibition, in a sense, that in Meigs County, we were ahead of the game. I mean, it took a while for, there were people that were trying to get prohibition for years before it actually happened. And so there was a newspaper article that we hit on the end of this last tour that we're just kind of doing them in chronological order. And it was about Pomeroy, because Pomeroy, all of Meigs County had gone dry before prohibition. I mean, this was a religious thing. Churches, you know, this is, you know, people were drinking a lot, and we want to try to stop that. And so all of the county had gone dry except Pomeroy. Now, Meigs County.
It answers a lot of questions right there.
Yeah. See, in those situations, there are some conclusions you can draw on your own, and if you miss them, I'll try to point them out to you. But it's that kind of a thing. They were discussing heatedly in the newspaper, because what are we going to do in Pomeroy? Because we have a German brewery, we have German bars, we have a huge German population in the towns and out in the country of Meigs County. The Germans are going, what? You know, but and that's just part of what was going on. And so, and that was before this happens, before what we're talking about here. We have other kinds of things like that. I want you to know ahead of time that in the packet that I gave you, which is not the murders, this is just the background for stills, or some of the murders are in there too. Yeah. This is just a little side still that they found, or they got fined, but they didn't necessarily get killed over it. But there are people here, if you have lived here in Meigs County for a while, you're going to find our family names in here, okay? There are people that you're here and you're going to look and say, wait, that's my great grandpa. Yeah, I never heard that story until now. That, by the way, that's not common, it is actually kind of interesting. I've talked on different issues where people broke down and said, oh, that's my great grandpa, and they were crying just because they were in the newspaper. And if they died of the plague back in World War I, you know, then that's, oh, I didn't know that's how they died. That's part of that personal thing. And then there's some, like on the first page, I think it was fairly
Which
early.
was the first one?
Yeah, anyhow, we have here the,
Is that your first one?
yes, the one about, well, this is, wait a minute, that guy, that baseball player,
Oh, yeah.
the baseball player was,
The baseball player.
yeah. I don't know where he is, he's in your packet anyhow.
Yeah, he's in there.
You don't have to see it right now, but we haven't had that many pro
Here he is.
baseball, football players at all, yeah. But apparently pro athletes back then were like today, they got in trouble. And so, I mean, this guy is a local hero, and he still is, but he did have a car wreck, and he was under the influence of moonshine, and he had 2 women in the car with him.
Alcohol?
But one of those girls was from Cheshire.
Oh, got it.
So it's a Gowdy County girl, so.
That is-
So that's kind of what we're looking at here, is those kinds of stories in there, and you can read those at your leisure, and we only had so many prepared. It is nice to see all of you out, for this.
We can have more copies made, probably.
Yeah, we can have more, we can get copies made upstairs if we need them and stuff. Anyhow, here's just some other quick things. Besides the famous athletes, there are other scandals here. I've had people who are here in the room at the moment who have said, wait a minute, that person was in my family. We have, actually more than one, as it turns out. There are there's issues about immigrants, because immigrants was a big issue back then too. And how were immigrants getting treated, and it, you know, we can see how it was handled back then by Meigs Countyans. There's businesses, what happened to that business? How did it, like say for example, a local establishment, the oldest business and continuous business in Meigs County. I'll let you try to figure out who that is, but they were one of those bars. These bars in that newspaper article were saying, okay, if you're gonna make this dry, what are we, you know, that's our business, we have nothing else, what are you gonna do? Well, maybe we'll serve sandwiches, you know, maybe we'll just be over and you can come in and chat, and what was coming in and out of the back door, you know, it's that kind of a thing. The other thing that was going on, it was the coal mines were trying to be unionized, and that was violence too. And some of that shows up in there. And so that's controversial. I don't know how you feel about any of these things, but this was what was happening. And this just hit me kind of towards the end as I was going through here, looking at the date. When I was first looking at it, I said, oh, wait a minute, 1926. 1926 was the date of the Ku Klux Klan funeral out at Rutland. It's in the photograph that everybody's seen now, I think. It's been in the newspapers and on the websites and all of that. That took place. The Klan was on the rise. It wasn't just in Meigs County, it was the whole Ohio Valley, including Indiana and Illinois that was there, but it was nationwide too. The Klan was big then. And so that shows up there. You'll find articles in there. There are things where they were asking if you want to be a new member, do you have references? Which I kind of found is funny. You have a reference to get into the Klan, but whatever the case, they had that. They had a huge squirrel banquet, which I really like squirrel, like it's on sweet potatoes, squirrel gravy with sweet potatoes. You have to be old maybe. Anyhow, but they had a big banquet, you know, they were talking about that. When I found that photograph, it was actually given to me by a family that said, just don't tell anybody. And since then, I've had so many people come up, former students especially, tell me, yeah, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandmother was in that. The very first person I talked to was over 100, was down at, because it was next, my father-in-law was in the nursing home with anyhow, and she went off. She was upset because, hey, they burned a cross in my friend's yard. And why did they burn a cross there? Because she was Catholic. Oh, yeah. And then the second lady I asked, who attended our church, the older lady, and she said, yeah, my husband and I were we did a lot of good. What did they do so good? She told me. We went up, we put on our clan outfits and went up on Flood Road, and during the weekend, driving around at night, finding people parking, if you understand that word. And they would kind of get them to move on. If you were in the mood, you ain't anymore. It's like that. So my mother-in-law was scared. She was a little girl. She lived down on just where you start up on Middleport Hill. Her bedroom was at street level, and they burned crosses. They had parades with torches and burned crosses right above those post office buildings that park there. And the week before, they had honored the Civil War veterans who were still left alive. And you go, again, that's anyhow, whatever the case, there's that kind of stuff is in here. It's what happened. If you want to know what happened, here it is. Now, if you want to know what happens, here she is.
Sometimes alcohol and bad decisions go hand in hand, unfortunately. One of the first one, and I think it's in your packet, was C.L. Castor poisoned by moonshine back in 1925. We're not sure, but they found his body in a ravine, and it was suspected that it was either intentional or unintentional poisoning from moonshine. So they do the autopsy, and they put the stuff from the stomach in a pig to see if it dies, and it does, but they ultimately decided he wasn't killed. It was an accident or some other reason.
But I've already talked to Chelsea, and the next, we may do a whole separate talk where instead of learning about moonshine, we learn how to butcher pigs. It'll be right here.
And then we had, so that was kind of a weird, tying in the moonshine use. Then we had a whole bunch of people that happened in, from 1923 to 1926. Lots and lots of murders, many of which took place on Willis Hill. Do you know where Willis Hill is? It's spelled differently in different places, okay? So it's sometimes W-Y-L-O-I-S, sometimes W-I-L-L-Y-S, sometimes W-Y-L-L-Y-S. So, but anyhow, it's off of Spring Avenue. So if you know where Spring Avenue is, if you go up Spring Avenue and go to the right. Did you say what?
Well, it's on the other side of Nye Avenue, so you go right across the top of the hill and you're on Nye Avenue.
Right.
Yeah.
And so several, and the one I'll spend the most time on, took place there. But this poor woman, Susan Rhodes, an aged woman, she was 65, they talk about how old she is. 63. But her death went unsolved for a lot of years. She was, they had an autopsy. The coroner, who was then Dr. James A. Miller, who coincidentally was murdered himself right before he testified against the defendant murderer named Miller. That's a whole different story. But they suspected murder. Her house was burned down, and they couldn't solve it initially. They had the inquest, and then eventually they say, these three murderers we're going to talk about a little bit, I think they might have got Miss Rhodes too. And the reason almost all the next few murders took place is because they knew too much about the bootlegging and moonshining business. Because there was quite a operation on Willis Hill with a number of individuals, and issues other than moonshining will come into it as well. Like Mike said, there was the unionization going on with a lot of violence at the different camps over whether to be unionized or not with the mines, and there was also the KKK and very, blatant racism. In fact, the last thing I'll read to you after we get John up here telling you about it still, talks about that. And you wouldn't believe what they published in the paper that's clearly, racist, and today you would just be appalled to read it, but it was what they put in the press in 1926 without reservation. But this poor old lady lived by herself, and she had talked to Sheriff Rice about the goings on up there, and so she was beat and her house and burned to death at her house. They did determine that she was probably killed before she was burned in the house, which I guess is something, because some speculation was that she might have been burned alive, but I think the autopsy resolved it. And by the way, I'll get that this week. So the Ohio History Connection has some of our old records, like part of my job's been gathering old records. They have inquests from coroners from 1845 to 1945, and they're those hand scripts that where they pull someone out of the river and they just haul their body up and say, okay, Sheriff, go get 6 men, and we're gonna do the autopsy and the inquest right here. And the jury would make a verdict. It was a death by accident, it was a death by violence and everything, and those are just fascinating. So I'm anxious to see the inquest results from some of these murders that we don't have in our possession, but it'll be with the clerk of courts when we get them back. There's several big banker boxes full, and they're intriguing. A lot of deaths, of course, associated with the river, and some of the first few I read, that again back in the 1840s, had to do with alcohol consumption. And as Mike said, the newspaper slants are very, very anti-alcohol. They just give example after example of the evils of alcohol through those early years. And clearly, like a guy drowned in the river from DTs. He was withdrawing from alcohol abuse, and that was the cause of death of one of them.
But when it came time to vote later on, that kind of slipped away, and so they voted not to be dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
We vote to have the prohibition, and then we voted not to have it.
Yeah.
It's in the Constitution and then it's out.
one of the few constitutional, it's weird to get a U.S. constitutional amendment, now Ohio does them all the time, but U.S. constitutional amendment to take place, in this late part of our, later in our history, and then to repeal it later was really unusual. I wanted to show, Mike mentioned that the library is wonderful about helping do research. This is actually one I found, but like them, I like looking at the rest of the page, because there's always a lot of information about what's going on in the rest of the world. And so this newspaper article also has accused woman of firing shot, Gallipolis, March 30th. Accused of fatally shooting Otto Nybert, 34, because of jealousy. Mrs. George Hall, pretty young white wife of a collared restaurant proprietor, was in jail here today. Mrs. Hall came here from Columbus. Nybert is a member of the local sporting fraternity. The shooting took place Monday night. So we're seeing some of those race issues in the newspaper, not just about these murders of Mrs. Rhodes, but otherwise. And I've got a whole lot of sheets that I'll show you that are just, you can't read them obviously, but it's just to show you that the era between 1923 and really the early 30s, we were in newspapers all over the state and even all over the country about our Hill of Horrors or Mount of Horrors. And this one's from Lima, for instance, and I know you can't read it, but gives you an idea of how infamous we were. The Moonshine King finally admits that he hired one of the murderers we'll talk about on the triple execution case we'll get to in a moment. And he was known as the King of Moonshine up on Willis Hill. Tim the King O'Brien, good old Irishman. Can't imagine alcohol and an Irishman, can you? And then of course we have the Masons that are meeting here in their newspaper. Of course a lot of Athens articles, and we have Sentinel articles here, but I thought they're easy to get to, so I kind of pulled from other places for this particular talk. Aged woman killed for whiskey. That murder of Miss Rhodes was literally for whiskey, as we'll see the other McCumber that we'll talk about the most was. We have the Daily Tribune, woman killed for half a gallon of whiskey. So yeah, the life wasn't very valuable when you're talking about trying to have a good business selling whiskey. Confession clears up from Pomeroy murder case from back in 23. And again, that's because of the McCumber murder we'll talk about in a little bit coming to light. In addition to Susan Rhodes, there's some other ones that I'm not going to go into huge detail on, but there was another woman named Mrs. Charles. Notice that she didn't have her own name, but I found it later. Batcher Smith was murdered, and it went unsolved, but they felt strongly that the same gang of murderers murdered her. She likewise had been an anti-alcohol, lived on Willis Hill, had talked to the sheriff, She was found beaten to death with her legs under the steps of a cellar house, and she went unsolved, but they felt sure it had to do with her anti-alcohol. Likewise, there was a Mrs. Charles Williams and a Joe Bandmeter that they believe was connected with this gang of murderers, the horrors on Willis Hill and all that. We have a Samuel Hill who was murdered actually on Thomas Fork. So it wasn't on Willis Hill, but it was connected with some of the same gang and had to do with the unions. So that murder was the guy, someone knocked on the door, or no, there was a ruckus. Mr. Hill was in his home out on Thomas Creek, or is it called Thomas Creek? Okay, Thomas Creek.
Thomas
And-
Ford, it's out,
Thomas Ford,
Yeah.
that's
it's
what.
out by,
Misway.
Misway Beach.
Yeah.
My boys.
Again, that's an old name.
Yeah,
but-
I know, Jack's. People are really old, it was Jack's. So he's at his house and hears something outside, he steps out and he is killed with like 20-some bullets, dead. And there were like 3 young men that were convicted of that murder. None of them were put to death, but they were all very young. It had to do with the unionization of the mines. So that was connected to the same group of people. They didn't value life very much, but those controversial things like alcohol, race, unionization were hot topics back then. Next, I'm gonna skip over some of the slides that I had on those other murders. Move on to one of our most famous murderers. Anyone know who that is while I try to find my,
McCumber.
yes. Let me see. James McCumber is killed by a trio, John Hedrick, Richard Rhodes, sometimes spelled differently, and John Bryant. And here, I want to make sure, as I want to do in my book, that the focus is not on the offender, but the focus is on the victims. And so I wanted to put his picture first here, because he wasn't that like perfect individual. He had some issues when he was divorced, and that, you know, that's a little weird for that time, and had abandoned his ex-wife and children and moved to Willis Hill. But he was a living human being, and of course what I like best is he even had a dog, so we know he was a good dog. He was a dog. But he unfortunately ran into some trouble when he left that wife. Let's look for the investigation. So he leaves the wife, and then he disappears after living on Willis Hill for a period of time. When he leaves the wife and children, he moves, he's white, I don't know if you can tell that, but he's white, and he moves on Willis Hill with a black family, an older man and woman, and they had a younger white woman also living in their house. So it's, you know, that's unusual to have mixed races at that time. And there was one fellow you saw there, which is named Bryant, the John Bryant guy, was not at all happy about the fact that Mr. McCumber was at this location, because he didn't think he had any business there, because he, Mr. Bryant, had his eye on the young woman and who had a child that lived in the house with the black people. So Mr. Bryant said, I gotta do something to get rid of McCumber, however you would say it. Also, McCumber was dry. He lived on Willis Hill among all the bootleggers, but he was not a drinker himself. He liked Miss Rhodes and Miss Smith and Miss Williams, saw all the bootlegging going on and all the sales, and was opposed to it, and had allegedly provided some information. So all the publications make it look like there are 2 potential issues for his subsequent murder, we'll discover. Both the being a snitch, you know, snitches get stitches, when he got killed. So he was allegedly telling about the bootlegging business, which of course cuts into people's money and lifestyle. And likewise, there was the issue of race with him, because he was in a mixed race household, which someone in particular, Mr. Bryant, was opposed to. So he goes missing in March of 1926. And I got lots of articles, not for reading right now, but to show you that this was really published all over the place. So this man's missing. Where did he go? He lived on this hill and he disappeared. 9 days later, after some investigation, well, I guess I got ahead of myself. So actually in March, when he disappears, he's at the house with this family, and Mr. Bryant wants to get rid of him. So he has to figure out how can I get this guy alone? And so he decides he's gonna tell everybody he's having a party for himself. He's got a birthday. His birthday was not till 6 months later, but we're having a birthday party for me. And so he sets up the party at the neighbor's house, and he makes sure everybody on Willis Hill is invited, except McCumber, because he didn't like him and he wasn't gonna invite him. So that wasn't a big deal. So he goes and they have this party, and he waits till the party is good and up and running, and all the moonshine's getting everybody happy, and there's a lot of noise, and when there's a lot of noise, he then signals his two co-defendants, which is John Hedrick and Richard Rhodes, and said, okay, now's the time. He's alone in this house. Bryant stays at the party, you know, and makes sure that the diversion's there. Nobody's going back over to the house where Mr. McCumber is. So Mr. Hedrick's and, Hedrick, sometimes it has an S, sometimes it doesn't. And Mr. Rhodes go in and get in a fight with McCumber, who tries to fight him off, but they end up beating him and knocking him down, and they're like, oh, we weren't supposed to kill him yet. But he wasn't dead. So they got him up, and they take him, if you know again where Willis Hill is, between Spring Avenue and Nye Avenue, they take him, dragging him, because he's stumbling, he's been hurt, but he's alive, all the way over the hills, almost out to
Charter Oak Hollow is where they
yes.
came down.
Yeah, which is close to Enterprise, not
Yeah,
far from
right.
Enterprise.
You right through Enterprise they came.
So they came all the way down by Enterprise.
And then
out
up over Rose Hill.
Yeah, over Rose Hill, yes. And then on down, and all the way out to Five Points,
Hollow,
basically.
yeah.
Dark Hollow,
Dark
and
Hollow.
up towards Five, those of us who've been around here all know where Five Points is. There was a farm there, an Arnold farm. Probably, Huey and I have looked, probably close to where all the highway business is now. And Hedrick had worked at that farm, so he knew it was there and no one was on it. So they talked this man into, not talking, they dragged him, convinced him, they had him blindfolded, they take him through all this blindfolded, and they get to the Arnold farm, and they push him down and say, crawl through the fence, and they shoot him in the back of the head and kill him. At that point, he's dead. And they throw his body into a cistern, an abandoned cistern, it was a dry cistern. They throw his body headfirst down into the cistern and leave him, and then go back to collect $15 and a quart of whiskey each. And they were promised more money than that, but it would be suspicious to have that much money at a time when your two little boys that worked for the Eberspaws at Forest Run in the mines, you know, these two young men that probably just bought things at the company store and ran an account, would not have that kind of money. So Bryant was pretty smart. He's like, I'll give you a little bit now, we'll give you more later, we'll give you more later, but here's some whiskey. And so then they found out that the alarm was called that night that he disappeared. Someone heard something, a ruckus, and they left the party, and the woman that lived in the house with the black people, she said, oh, someone's murdered James because of the blood. And she immediately went to that. And it was kind of funny in the articles, it's like, someone murdered. And like, why would you say that? Man had a nosebleed, but she suspected that. And so they called the alarm and they searched for 9 days. It appeared that someone, probably Hedrick and Rhodes and or Bryant, had gone back out where he was eventually found and threw dead leaves into the cistern to try to cover up the murder. And of course there were volunteers, like, you know, during my lifetime, I don't know if you remember Mr. Will, poor Mr. Will that was killed in Chester. The whole community went out after Mr. Will disappeared and walked all over the place trying to just find his body, because how did he just disappear? They were doing the same thing for Mr. McCumber. And they're, you know, all over Willis Hill and all around the region, and someone's up near 5 Points, said, well, you know, there's this abandoned farm up here, and they say, well, those leaves look disturbed, and they find a recent tobacco container. They kind of like, oh, that looks strange, and then they start digging, and under the leaves they find him upside down and bring him out, and then they put together and that it was this Hedrick, Rhodes, and Bryant. And then they all started ratting each other out, you know, like rats do. Started ratting each other out, and eventually Hedrick's does confess and pleads guilty. Well, I should tell you, initially there were 9 people. There were a lot of people that they took in, some of whom were really more witnesses than anything else that were held in custody, including some people that were connected to that Hill murder by Sapp and Evelyn that I told you about. So they're all connected, this group of people, and so they actually do what you've heard about, and they keep people in custody as a material witness during some of this time. But here's to show you, this mystery is being reported in Troy Daily News, and at one time there were 10 suspects they kept watching for this. There's Troy again. Bootleggers blamed for 3 slayings. So now they're putting it together that it's probably not just poor Mr. McCumber, but there's these other people too. And of course they were. And both of those murders that were solved from this, which would be Mr. McCumber and Miss Rhodes, were done simply for whiskey. That they were both killed in the name of bootlegging. And the grand jury considers this matter, and back then I've discovered, I should back up, because what I do for a living I know now because I read instructions every time the grand jury comes. Grand jury is a very secret process, and for a lot of reasons, because sometimes the grand jury considers something, and if someone heard, they might flee before you can catch them. The other big one is the grand jury may consider something that is false, and the grand jury says, no, I don't believe there really was a crime. I think this is for some other ulterior motive, or there's not enough proof. And if word got out that someone was considered for an offense from the grand jury, you would ruin their reputation. Well, in the 1920s, they didn't really care about that. And you can see in the files every single case that was considered by the grand jury. And one big one that I think we've talked about some is the previous sheriff's case. And we'll talk about that. One of his cases, there was a sheriff named Roscoe Fowler, that his whole case where he was allegedly involved in the murder of a political rival, all that information from grand jury, it's in the paper. And at his trial, there's information at other people's trial that who was on that grand jury. Well, that's all secret now. That you know which neighbors voted to indict that person, or that they considered, and it was a no bill, it's called, there was a decided not to indict, and who was on there. So it would be something that would be intimidating by today's standards to have that happen for sure. But this grand jury, I think they were having fun. There's the Pickaway Daily Call. Special grand jury called to McCumber's murder, 2 suspects under arrest. Well, eventually we know there were 3 suspects under arrest. The grand jury probe in Pomeroy. Let me find another local paper. The Coshocton Tribune. I mean, it is all over the place. Ghastly murders probed by the jury, which I will read you at the end here, what I mean by ghastly. And I think the newspaper editor was correct in calling it that. Here we are at Urbana. Urbana's reporting about Pomeroy. Many weird Ohio slayings. Mount of Horrors gives up ghost. Killed for a pittance. Murders were committed for a gallon of whiskey or a mere $15. Gallon of whiskey for poor Miss Rhodes, and $15 for Mr. McCumber. So the grand jury's hearing all this big, big news. And then we have a trial, multiple trials, because Hedrick pleads guilty. Bryant and Rhodes go to trial, they're found guilty. And then they're brought back to testify against Tim the King O'Brien, because of his hiring of the killing of Miss Rhodes. So they are not only suspects, but then they become witnesses because they have the knowledge about the situation with her being killed because she was a rat. And the grand jury is hearing all of these, and they are suspecting those other ones that I mentioned to you. Miss Smith, Miss Williams, and Mr. Bandmeter. I wonder if that was really supposed to be Bandmeter. Typo. Were there Bandmeters here? I don't know.
I've never heard of one, but
And
I'd
Sam.
go with the typo.
Yeah, and it is interesting, the same newspaper articles will spell Willis multiple ways and Rhodes multiple ways. In the same article, it's like, nobody proved this. They didn't have spell check, I guess. They didn't have spell check. But as you can imagine, the news of these trials were everywhere, and so people would pack into our little courthouse, and we would have been at the courthouse where I work by then. And we have several murders where they literally it was standing room only, or people in the hallways for some of these, especially when the verdict was going to be announced and stuff. And there is no question that the sentiment, community-wise, for these murders was, really adverse to them. Nobody was sympathetic. Well, probably, maybe some of the people in Willis Hill might have been, but overall, the community and the slant in the paper is that they thought not only these 3 men that we'll talk about getting executed, but that the whole gang, even the young men that killed Mr. Hill, and all of them should be put to death. So the juries all decide guilt. Mr. Hedrick, he pled, and the judge found him guilty. Bryant went to trial, was found guilty, and Rhodes went to trial and found guilty. Judge Miller, and we had Dr. Miller and Judge Miller, Judge Miller, was given the task, unfortunately, when she finds somebody guilty of aggravated murder and heard all the gory details, had the unenviable task of having to pass sentence. And he literally wept as he passed the sentence that they would all 3 have to be executed by electric chair in Columbus, and that he was so moved by it, and hit some of the languages in some of the newspapers about what he told them. And he, as he left and was tearful and crying, he shook hands with the men, and you know, God be with you kind of thing. And both Rhodes and Hendricks did shake hands with him, but Bryant refused. He refused. So the men were then gathered together, the three musketeers of McCumber's death, with the Evelyn and Sapp and O'Brien and there were like 9 of them all together. They ship them all to Columbus together, and there's newspaper articles again from all over the place about this cast of characters. And they get to Columbus, and this is all happening in a matter of a short time. The murder took place on McCumber in March of 26. We get him in Columbus by June, the beginning of June of 1926. They get executed early September of 1926. I mean, you wouldn't have time to get the transcript done by then, even with word processing now.
You're entitled to a speedy trial.
Yeah, in this case, a speedy execution. So those 3 men that were sentenced to death, of course, had lots of family that loved them. They may have done something terrible, but they had family that loved them. And the day before the execution, one of the murderers had a wife and a child who weaseled their way into the governor's office. The state fair was going on about the time they were going to execute this trio, and the mother, which would be the wife of one of the defendants, and the child got with a group that was from the state fair going on a tour of the governor's mansion. And they got to the governor, and the little boy jumped on him and started saying, "Please, please tell him not to kill my daddy. Please tell him not to kill my daddy." And the woman wept and stuff, and the governor's like, "Well, I really leave that stuff up to the clemency board." And you know, it creates a big scene and lots of emotions, as you might imagine, and it was a real tearjerker when you read about it. Likewise, I think it was Rhodes' mother goes into the prison to tell him goodbye before he's executed. And she is so distraught. They take her out, literally drag her out of there because she's not going to leave. And she is yelling and screaming and pounding on the doors and has a heart attack. Doesn't say whether she died, but she had a heart attack at the prison gates because her son is going to be executed. And sure enough, there's last minute, like there is even now, for an execution, last minute pleas for the governor's pardon or clemency or some court of appeals or a Supreme Court to say, no, wait a minute. We think there could be something wrong. We can't undo them if we kill them. But that didn't happen. And so we get the final hours of these men's lives. They all ate together, and what they ate is reported in the newspaper, and that they all stoically made their way in line, and it talks about who gets killed first. The collared guy, Mr. Bryant, as they refer to him, he was executed first, and next was Hedrick, I believe, and then Rhodes. And they only had one Old Sparky, as he was actually called. The electric chair Old Sparky was just one, so they weren't literally simultaneously executed. But one individual would be electrocuted and moved to the side, laid out. Then the next one, electrocuted, moved to the side, lay him out, and then the third one. And
that little number, we take the number.
they did go by, they did take their numbers, because there's an article in here about, what order are they gonna execute? Well, depending on what order we give them for inmate numbers, and they'll get those the next day or two. So they literally had a system to it based on their inmate numbers that were issued. So they were all executed, and there were a lot of people there watching. from the community. The sheriff, of course, was there. There was a local reporter there named Horace Carr. Some of you are old enough to have known, not the one we knew that had the wild horse, but I think it would be an uncle or a great uncle from what my friend has told me. And he was literally, somehow for the press, he was there and witnessed it, and he described what he saw and what he smelled. Yeah, and it's very graphic. It smelled like burning bacon, is what he said. And so the articles are just, I mean, there's very, very graphic of what he saw, and that was, to me, it was like, you'd never forget that. You'd never forget that. But it was famous. It was really, really famous what was going on. So after these 3 men died, one of them, Mr. Bryant's family, took his body to Columbus for burial. Mr. Hedrick's and Mr. Rhodes were being transported back to Pomeroy for their families to receive them. Like I say, everybody knew there had been this big first time ever, triple execution in the state of Ohio. So probably the Ewings, I believe, the coroner or the undertakers were bringing them down the road, and I do believe it was the Ewings. And they come down Old 33, and they're kind of hungry. You know, it didn't really ruin their appetite, I guess, too much. So they stopped to eat in Logan. And while they're in Logan, people figure out, well, what's that old hearse doing there? I bet those people that got killed from Pomeroy. So a group of Logan people come up to them and say, hey, are those dead bodies that just got executed? And they say, yeah, can we see them? And they get them out. They get them out and open them up so people can see them. Yeah. And then I have not been able to find proof of this, but a lot of old timers claim that they also brought those bodies down and opened their caskets for the public viewing near Kroger or Powell's. There was a building there that had a lot of glass windows, and as you know, don't do this. This is a big deterrent. You see what happens if you do something stupid and kill people. You get electrocuted, and you don't look so good in your casket. And here, you know, every child. I think it's Susie Samuels, that's the blast from the past. Susie Salisbury had said that she, yeah, you remember Susie Samuels playing tuba. Susie Salisbury had said she either remembered her family saying they actually saw those dead bodies along 2nd Street.
She would have been up on Willis Hill.
Yeah, she grew up. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So everybody knew that. I mean, that would have been something your neighbors talked about.
Yeah.
Window dressing.
Yeah. And so window dressing. Peggy and I have been talking about all these connections. Jane Ann was with me. We were at the museum for the 150th, and they are. All these things are connected. Huey and I grew up hearing stories from our grandmother. Her name was Gladys Morgan Riggs. Yeah. And she was she's kind of built like her, just short and round. And she, like me, played the piano at the little country church. And so she would have been, I think we figured out, 15 or 16 years old when they brought these bodies back. She didn't get to come down and see them because they lived out in the country and they didn't come to town. But Mr. Hedrick's family wanted to have a good burial for him at Mount Hermon Church. We might have some Mount Hermon Church people here. And so someone came to her from the family and said, hey, we need a piano player for the funeral for Mr. Hedrick's. And she went. And I mean, such a impactful that our whole lives, we heard the story about how she played piano at the funeral for an executed murderer who's then buried, you know, in our community. And that was, you know, you remember judging me 15 and, you know, oh, that guy that's up there in the casket, he killed people.
Let me interrupt just a second, because it is an old Appalachian custom. Many of our families and probably have these photos, that just at a normal funeral, that they would have that last family photograph where they propped the casket against the wall and the family gathered around.
There are like websites of those pictures.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's I think we have one somewhere in the family of a youngster, a baby or something. Haven't we seen that? You can see, you know, a lot of times those children live.
I copied a lot of those.
I bet you have. People say, hey, don't say anything, but I want this to.
A lot of those.
Yeah, it was really, really, really creepy. But I will I've got some other things. I want to show you the interesting pictures of them and death certificates and read something to you, but I don't want to take too much more time because I want John to talk about his still. And then if we have time, then I'll show you the death certificates and pictures. So most of us were more interested in if we can get Moonshine now.
Well, not yet, but we're making it, stocking up. So a lot of what she was saying, or both of them was saying, about the violence that goes with moonshine was true. I mean, you look at what bootleggers did to other bootleggers, you know, kind of even goes into drug dealers and stuff, how you get on someone else's area and they're gonna run you out, they're gonna burn your house down. Goes back to Hatfield McCoy's, goes back to the Bonder brothers. There's a good movie out there about the Bonder brothers. Shows all the violence back and forth that they did. Even went clear back to the law, you know. Bonder brothers, you know, they killed I think they called him an inspector, but from Chicago. He come down, he's gonna stop all the liquor making in the area, or they're gonna pay a price to be able to make the liquor. So the corruption, and when they bucked up against it, basically it become a big fight, and he tried to go after him. He ends up dying in the end. Good movie to watch. A lot of good
Well,
history.
you need to watch it now, he just told us
A
all
lot of
this.
good history. And then it goes clear back to coal mines. You ever get the chance to go up to New Straitsville? They have a Robinson's Cave. The coal miners actually went on strike because they were unionizing. They were having their union meetings right there in Robinson's Cave. Right across the road from it is Black Diamond Distillery and a couple other little things in that town. It's a small town, but when the coal miners actually, you know, went on strike, they filled the coal mine, the carts full of coal, shoved it into the mines and actually caught the mines on fire. And there's actually, you can look it up online, there's still hot spots that come up today, and then they just resurface. And that made it easy for us moonshine guys to go into the woods and hide and make liquor, because everyone would see, you know, smoke from that coal mine. That was the area that Al Capone come through, and he stopped in New Straitsville, and it was kind of like their halfway point where they pick up liquor and run it back and forth. So that's a pretty good place to go up and visit. They've got some info up there. They do a small moonshine festival up there where they run a still up there, and you know, it's a lot larger than this one. I think our one at the distillery is larger than that. But over to equipment, I brought a few things. So this would have been one of our oldest pieces that we have, which is not very old. You know, we've been doing it for 18 years. Starting to go legal now, or are legal now.
Got that on record.
Yeah, are legal now. I won't say starting to go legal. We have all our permits and everything. So this is a condenser that I built 18 years ago. It would actually go basically on top of a beer keg, and you could run alcohol straight out of the beer keg. We've done it over fire, and we've done it over, you know, wood fire or propane fire. So that was one of our first pieces that we built. This one here is actually built at a steel shop, and this is a 1.5 gallon steel, and it's built by a 8-year-old kid. Built that one. When this one was built, I was like 18 years old, so, and the solder don't look half as good as that 8-year-old kid. But that 8-year-old kid built that one, and we purchased that for our distillery. It's serial numbered, all that stuff. So he's the youngest still builder to have a still in a distillery. Because every still you do, every piece of equipment you do have to register. You got to put a serial number, all that on it. So he's the youngest kid registered to have a still built like that.
Is he local?
They are from Tennessee. They do build and they do ship out and stuff. They're about 4.5 hours here. It's like Elizabethton, Tennessee. We have basically the same steel, all 3 sizes for the distillery. I have like I have an issue with buying stills. I have like 12 of them. So, kind of like a shoe fetish for the women, I guess. But all three of our stills for the distillery are pretty much the same setup. This would have been almost what they used back, back in the old days when they ran. We run all of our stuff now on electric, and they would have used furnace fires, maybe propane if, I'll say if they were more of the city ones. Most of them was all furnace fires for it. They built a nice furnace out of clay and rock, and this would set down inside there. But all of ours now are ran on electric. This one I just set on a hot plate to run it. This one's really about playing around with stuff, and it was about supporting the case, the little boy that built it. But we've got a 15-gallon like this, which is our test still, and then we got a 150-gallon like this, which is our still that we actually produce on. Like I said, everything runs on electric. It's real nice now that you don't have to deal with all that heat and everything from it. Something like this, back then they would just build it themselves. I can't build nothing that looks very good. So I went to them and got everything built, and something like this would be like $400, $450. Something like our big setup runs about 20 grand. So back then, of course, they didn't have that. And going over to like talking about the murders for a gallon, or what was it, a gallon of whiskey or
2
a couple
quarts and $30
quarts.
for a gallon, yeah.
A gallon of whiskey back then would cost you probably somewhere in the area about $5. And now you go over to a gallon of whiskey and you're talking, depending on where you get it, you're talking somewhere around the $200 mark or higher. Big distilleries are gonna be way higher, but they also made theirs fast, and it didn't matter what went in it to them. I've got some literature over there that I have if anybody wants to look at it, but there's certain ways we do everything now so it's safe. They ran through radiators, they ran through galvanized, anything they could get their hands on. There's actually some history about using logs, carving out the inside of a log and filling it full of alcohol, and then putting a cap on it and running it through that log. You ran steam into it. So there's several different ways that they ran it, and it wasn't safe. That's probably why that article says that he was poisoned. You don't separate heads and 4 shots and all that. It can be bad for people. So, and just the product being made in whatever they could get a hold of. So anybody can look at this stuff. And I brought in some different grains. This is our 555, our red, white, and blue mash that we use, which is basically this before we grind it up. And then that's just our normal yellow corn, our mash for what we call fully involved moonshine, because everything that we're doing goes back to the fire service, the theme of the fire service. So hopefully soon we'll be up and selling, but it's just been a long process with the state and the federal government, so.
And it's not your day job either, kind of
No,
like you do this
no.
on the side.
I have 5 different McDonald's I work, a car wash I work, the firehouse, and then this, so.
Need something to do.
Yeah. But if anybody has any questions, I'll answer anything.
I'm just curious, when you make that, what would the percentage be of, alcohol?
So everything, of course, starts in the mash. If you get a high ABV in the mash, you'll get a high ABV in your liquor afterwards. And also, I'll say this type of equipment. When we run a brandies are made from fruits. I don't like to have that thumper in place because it makes your alcohol go way up, but it also strips flavor. So I've got a you know, another configuration where I can go from here and I can go right down here to that worm and I can take that thumper out of there and I get a little more water molecules to it, but I also get a little more flavor. So, really depends on what you're running. What we ran this last weekend, on Saturday was the yellow corn, and we started out at 160 proof, so it'd be 80%. Yeah, so it'd be 80%. You really wanna run it until you get way down in there, and then you blend everything together. Final product's right around 100 proof once we get done. So, when we run that red, white, and blue, it comes out roughly at about 140, 150, and then we take it down to 107 proof. And then it's all barrel aged after that.
What's the advantage?
You get drunk quicker now.
The advantage of what?
Apparently.
Well, a lot of people want it high just because they want, you know, on the illegal side of moonshine, and they want to be able to produce high proof and sell it real fast, so they just run it fast and get rid of it. A lot of people want to buy it that high so they can make like apple pie and stuff like that out of it. So then your apple pie comes out, you know, if you do 150 proof and you do the apple pie the way that I would do it, it'd come out about a 70 proof when you get done. It's a drink. Yeah, it's a cocktail basically.
I'm glad you learned that. That's good. She's into this and doesn't have a clue because she doesn't drink. That's so good, Linda.
But you can soak apples in it and make you a cobbler or a pie with it and eat it. It does take some alcohol to do that. You can do that. But we've got some big plans coming up down the road. We're gonna have a couple steel build classes at the distillery. And then we will also have a couple mashing classes, some stuff for people to learn, because Ohio is pushing, which goes crazy from back then till now. Ohio is pushing for it to be legal in Ohio. Like marijuana, it will still federally be illegal. So I guess if you made the wrong person mad, they might look at it. But I talked to one of the cops the other day about the marijuana thing, because it just blew my mind. I went by a house and there was like 6 plants sitting out on that roof. And he's like, there's nothing we even try to do about it. He said, because it's legal. So they're trying to do the same thing with this, and if they get it, I think it's Senate Bill 13 on the alcohol side right now. It's 100 gallons per person, up to 2 people in a household that you can make. And that's yearly.
Well, there's something to be said for that, because you know what you're getting. It's kind of like the people that probably don't agree with the marijuana legalization, but I can tell you from the work I do, we have people that buy marijuana on the street now, and they don't know what they're getting, and they may overdose on fentanyl that's been laced with that marijuana, whereas if you go buy it in a controlled environment like a distillery, or dispensary, wrong word, dispensary, you're gonna know what you're getting and what the dosage is. Likewise, you'd rather have somebody doing it right and not killing someone with it. Yes, sir?
In Ohio, though, to grow, you're not supposed to be able to see it, and it's supposed to be locked up. It has to be fenced and locked up.
It's supposed to be.
Yeah, they pick their battles. They got a lot to do.
Yeah.
It's like,
Okay.
yeah, I'm sure they do. I mean, you know, we spent years pulling marijuana plants, and now we're trying to fight people from overdosing on fentanyl and meth.
It's more than about kids being.
Absolutely,
Just go
yeah.
and pull 'em.
Yeah, that's
You know what I
right.
mean?
That's a good
Yeah,
point.
so they're getting that way with this. And like she said, you know, if you come to a distillery, one, we gotta be state inspected. You gotta do everything through the federal. They have to look at your stills, they have to look at everything. So, you know, this one don't have the pop off, but our big one down there has a pop off so it can explode. And then it also has a vacuum so it can't implode. which imploding's like crushing like a pop can. Normally happens if it gets too cold too fast. You shut it down, it's raining outside, or you're in a really, really nice air-conditioned building or whatever, and it gets cold too fast, it'll implode, crush like a pop can. There's been a lot of big distillery fires, which happens from leaks and stuff. You know, back then they made a paste out of something that almost looks like that in flour. They stuck the pipes together and they just put that paste through. Now we do everything right like that with these. There's a gasket that goes in between them. They go together, you snap out on it, no leaks. So, as long as your gasket's good, I'll say it that way. We change ours out quite a bit just to make sure. But everything's safer nowadays with this. Equipment, the finished product, everything you get is safer nowadays by going this route, same way it would be with the marijuana, by going to a dispensary.
Everybody a fan of good old Rocky Top? They getting your corn from a jar? I like
Yeah.
that, as soon as I saw that. Anybody else know that song? Good old Rocky Top, that's so right, yeah.
That's how I always tell everybody I prefer my apple pie from a jar.
From a jar.
Or the doctor said something about, asked me what type of vegetables I intake. And I said, well, I intake corn. And he said, well, that's good. I said, well, yeah, but it's in the liquid form. So.
Well, there's a great book out there that talks about what he was talking about, being the moonshiners and having your stills down in the hills. And then eventually, there was also, of course, during Prohibition, those illegal, I don't know, they were bootleggers, I guess, but they had, like, from the old distilleries that were legitimate, they had prescriptions and stuff for them. And there's a book called The Bourbon King that talks about the corruption in that. And this big guy from Germany, George Ramos, that was the king of the bourbon illegal underground bootlegging and shipping throughout the country, made millions and millions and millions of dollars in that business during Prohibition in particular. And was also involved in several shootouts where people died during it, that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's kind of a violent business.
Yeah, a lot of violence went with it back then. Now if you go, you know, they invite you into the distillery. We'll invite you in as long as we're there, of course. If we're running, you know, and someone wants to taste test, we don't care, as long as, you know, they're of age and all that good stuff. But if we're running, us, and I know 2 or 3 other ones, you can take your little sample cup in there, as long as you want something a little bit higher, and go right underneath the worm and catch it and get you a little drink. So a lot of them now, you know, they invite you in, versus back then, it was a big secret thing. Nobody wanted to be on there. And it even goes back to Facebook. You know, there's probably, I'm gonna say probably 5,000 groups that has to do with moonshine on Facebook. The equipment, the making of it, there's groups out there called like America and Whiskey, podcast, Moonshine Militia, stuff like that, where they get on there and they openly talk about what they make and everything right on Facebook, because it's getting so common now that, you know, they're not gonna come in and bust you over making 2 or 3 jars of moonshine now. You'd have to be out there peddling it quite a bit. So.
Here's another quick thing, kind of ties into this. There was a raid, 1925, when the White House. I'm always interested on how many people know where these places are. Or were the White House. Randy's family, I know, because I married into it. They have some stories of their own about the White House. But anyhow, they found no moonshine, no alcohol at all. But they did find Arch Qualls there.
Yeah.
They did not find any alcohol in him either. But the deputies plural, swore in court that they saw him throw a bottle in the river. They could not retrieve the bottle, could not find the bottle, but they swore that they could smell alcohol down on the riverbank.
And he was convicted, wasn't
And
he?
he was convicted a mere $500,
Yeah.
and there's some racism in that.
I was gonna say, I bet you.
Read through there, that's like
Yeah,
the
I'd
highest
say
one
that
it
was
is.
racist.
But I also, this is in the packet, because, all of this is going on, and it's all of the controversies and stuff, but Pomeroy, they're the county seat, and anyhow, there's an article that says, "Tell the world you're proud to live in Pomeroy." Now, if you set that to something like country roads, take me home, it could be a good thing to draw in tourism, over top of the alcohol.
Right, we have to leave here by 6 because the acoustic group's coming in. If anybody wants to answer more questions, we can go upstairs. But I do want to tell you a couple other quick things. The most famous of our trio that was executed was this John Hedrick. He, before it's over with, when I say it's over with, before he's executed, confesses that he's actually a serial killer. And he confesses to his brother at the prison that he can recall at least 7 to 9 murders that he has committed since he was like in his early 20s. Several which we think were here in Meigs County. There was an insurance salesman, like one I'm married to, that I think he sold life insurance. His name was Donahue. And he would go around and collect the premiums at the camps, like at the miners' camps and so on. And he just disappeared one day. And it was rumored that he was probably murdered by, some of these characters, but they never could prove it. And so his widow was struggled for many years. And then the story came out that John Hedrick's brother, years like in 1930, came to the police and said, "Oh, I really need to tell you what John told me before he's executed about some murders." And he claims that this Mr. Donahue was murdered and put back in a cave and left there, to rot, and did. And the brother of Mr. Hedrick signed an affidavit that swore that he had heard that information from his brother, that then allowed Mrs. Donahue to get the life insurance money. But there were a whole bunch of them. So, we have had serial killers right here in Meigs County. Probably more than that, but that's all we know about. I want to show you their death certificates, yeah. I just think this is amazing. Of course, the first person we want to focus on is poor Mr. McCumber and his dog. Here, I thought this was interesting. We have pictures in an out-of-town newspaper of the 3 executed individuals. This is the one at the top left is Mr. Hedrick. The one top right is Mr. Bryant. The bottom left is Tim O'Brien, who wasn't executed but was in prison for life for hiring Miss Rhodes' murder. And then Richard Rhodes is the one on the right, whose mother had a heart attack. So it was interesting enough that it's floating, their pictures are floating around. And that was it. Let me see which paper that was from. That's in the Cleveland Plain Dealer paper. And then we look at poor Mr. McCumber's death certificate. He was beat on the head and shot through the brain by John Hedrick's, Richard Rhodes, and something Bryant. So his actual death certificate shows that he was a murder victim. And then if you want to see what the cast of characters look like, we have, that's Mr. Hedrick, the mass murderer or serial murderer, and his death certificate, which shows that he was legally electrocuted.
Not illegally.
Yeah, not illegally, it wasn't an accident. And then we have Mr. Bryant, who likewise has a death certificate, legally electrocuted. And finally, Mr. Rhodes. He just looks like a nice young guy. And one thing we noticed, they all have the same shirts on. They must be when the only people they photographed back then were those that were going to be executed. Not every inmate. Now they're all photographed. But back then they wouldn't have had a photograph of every inmate. But because these guys were on death row, and if you look, they're all wearing the same shirt. So they just say, "Take it off, John." Okay. Now, Richard, come on up and we'll take yours. But they all have the exact same shirt on. That's weird. That's really
You
strange.
know, that's good research, by the way.
Yeah, well, actually, my bailiff was the one that noticed that, he was the one that caught it, and of course, our last guy was legally electrocuted as well. But I do have a handout, cause I don't wanna hold any time questions, did you hand this one out or not?
No, I did not take yours.
This is, I'm not gonna read it to you, but it's the only thing I printed, cause I've got loads and loads of research, but it all ultimately is gonna go, hopefully, in this book. But this one kind of ties together the times and how inappropriate things were, if you want to pass them around. This was in the Greenville, probably how I say it, Daily Advocate on March 31st, 1926. So this would have been right after Mr. McCumber's body had been discovered, but it's about the time they're going to grand jury, because that's what it talks about. Mount of Horrors gives up stories of murder and orgies that pale fiction. Pomeroy, Ohio, March 31st. The great Pomeroy Ben's Mount of Horrors today was giving up its ghost, naked secrets of weird murders that have baffled authorities for years. A country grand jury today was hearing stories of murders long forgotten, listening to details of some of the most ghastly crimes of record. A picture of black men and white women dancing in each other's arms while black women and white men laughed in drunken glee was being painted for the jury that seeks to end the reign of terror on the Mount of Horrors, a ragged and bare mountain near here that was originally named Willis Hill. The jurymen, of course they were all men, sat dumbfounded while witnesses told of murders to order at prices ranging from a gallon of moonshine to $15 per death, and of drunken parties attended by whites and blacks that were opening with prayer. 2 of these mysterious murders have been solved by confession, and 3 elsewhere moonshiners of terror sector were awaiting the actions of the law. John Shorty Bryant, dusky dozen of the region, took a dislike to James McCumber, white, and employed 2 other white men, John Hedrick and Richard Rhodes, to murder him. According to the confessions of the trio, the price paid for the murder was $30, and this was paid in installments in order to ward off suspicion, the confession said. Hedrick's and Rhodes' well-known characters, and then it's got a mess up on the copies. Anyhow, they were about displaying $30 at night would have caused talk. Their Negro employer calmly related. So he explained to him, I'm not gonna pay you all of it now because it would be suspicious. McCumber, although living in the Moonshine region, was himself dry, as I said, Bryant continued. But authorities think they see a more subtle motive for his murder. McCumber deserted his wife and went to live with Jerry Newber and his wife, a Collard family. A white woman also made her home with the Newbers and was an associate of the Collard men on the section. Bryant confessed that he wanted her and was afraid that McCumber might interfere. McCumber disappeared from the neighbor home on March 15th. His body, with head battered, was found in an abandoned cistern 9 days later. In a tone of casual, as if he had been speaking of the weather, Bryant related the circumstances of McCumber's death. He told of throwing a birthday party for himself, although it was 6 months away, and of inviting the gang, whites and blacks, except for McCumber. Then, after the moonshine had flowed freely and the noise of the merrymakers sufficient to drown the cries of the victims, he sent Hedrick and Rhodes sulking into the night and into the room occupied by the doomed man a few steps away. Hedrick took up the story at this point and told how he and his companion in crime called McCumber to the door and struck him with a blow on the head. That was a mistake, Hedrick said dryly, for it almost caused us to have to carry him away. But he revived soon, and we forced him to walk us through the hills and woods for 4 miles. Then we shot him with a .22 caliber revolver. He fell to the ground in a groan. Then we placed our heels on his back to kill the gurgling sound in his throat. I didn't tell you that part, did I? Bryant told us not to kill him in the house, as it would mess up things, Rhodes interposed. Hedrick was accused of another murder following his confession. He has practically admitted all the details, said Sheriff Rice. King Tim O'Brien, former czar of the moonshiners in this district and who presided for many years over Mountain Inn, a notorious liquor establishment, told Sheriff Rice he hired Hedrick to murder Almira Susan Rhodes on May 6, 1923. The price was 1.5 I guess it was 1.5 gallons. I forgot that. Boy, it was more. 1.5 gallons of moonshine liquor, the king said. Hedrick admits that he was made the offer and accepted it, but said he got from Charleston, West Virginia to do the job just a few hours too late. I don't know what that means. The grand jury today expected to return indictments against all the men named and take steps towards solving the mysterious deaths of the others in that section. Most recent of those was that of Sam Hill. Again, we got the Union guy, who was shot when he answered a knock at his door recently. 5 youths were arrested, but later freed. The crime is thus far unsolved. We know that it was eventually solved. Then there was Mrs. Charles Bratcher Smith, who was found dead in the steps of her home about 5 years ago, just a few months after her husband had died under mysterious circumstances. Mrs. Charles Williams, negress, I guess that's a Negro woman, I guess negress, was found dead at her home. Rats had eaten her fingers away, and the word went out that she had partaken of poison liquor. Again, no further light was ever thrown on the death. Joe White, lived alone in a little shanty near the hill. One day, the shanty burned with Banmeter inside. As no trace of a fire in the stove was found, some regarded this burning as significant. Aroused by the morbid stories of the most recent murders, the townspeople here are determined to clear the slate, and the grand jury will be asked to delve into every phase of liquor and murder orgies. Yeah, can you imagine? That was in the newspaper. You wouldn't let the kids read it, would you? My goodness. I just thought that was the kind of summed it all up. But do you have questions for Mike, John, or me?
I know who's gonna come to your place.
I went there the other day.
I mean, what do you do there?
So it's not a bar.
You sell.
It's not a bar, but it will have a few cocktails that you can come in and drink a couple cocktails. We do have a couple tables that we build out of Middleport's fire hydrants that they took out. We have a bar in there where you can walk up and you can do tastings. So you come in, you purchase a taste